Welcome to Beyond Sports with Paul and Jeremy. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about something a little more serious than just watching games, but also there's a little levity to it. We're going to talk about fandom. I've been watching all the NBA games, and some of the NFL games lately. Paul has too. We've watched some of them together on our live stream. You should check out the live stream, by the way. If you subscribe to us on Podbean, you'll get notifications when we go live to watch games, and we have a good time doing that. And along the lines of that, I know that you get a big indication of where Paul's loyalties lie, and he loves to talk about Indianapolis sports. He talks about the Colts. He talks about the Pacers. And me, I've been a little different. I don't necessarily have any particular teams that I've been talking about. And that led me to think, well, what is it that makes a fan? How do you define fandom? And is it okay to be one type of fan versus the other? And I think you know what I'm talking about when I say that. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. And I think it's kind of a cool contrast that Paul and I have in the way that we watch sports and follow sports. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and we'll try to get into that.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
All right. So, of course, there's two different types of fans that we all know about. There's the loyal, diehard fan, that fan that watches the team through thick and thin. They're good and bad. And then there are other types of fans that are a little bit less concerned, less diehard. Then they're fair weather fans, they're bandwagon fans, whatever you might call them. So I want to know, Paul, what are your thoughts on the different types of fans? Explain what type of fan you are and your thoughts on the different types of fans.
It's interesting. So before we actually talked about this and before we mentioned this fandom, I was just like, yeah, like I'm a Colts, I'm a Pacers fan, I'm a Pirates fan. Like that's like my core, like that's what it is, right? And then I try to think about my journey and how I arrived at those. And it's actually kind of interesting. I feel like what I realized in my own individual journey was that fandom for me was in various stages. I was both a long-term fan, and I was also a kind of like a fan by enjoyment, I guess is the way to put it. So I guess we'll talk a little bit more about where some of that came from, but just the introduction, being from Indianapolis, my whole family's from Indianapolis. That's all I knew, right? You had the Pacers, you had the Colts, and honestly, the Pacers at one point weren't necessarily probably the biggest thing. But when I was a kid, this is around the craze, right? When you had Rick Smits, when you had Reggie Miller, right? It was easy to be a fan of the Pacers, right? Because at that time it was local TV, right? You saw the players living there. They stayed with the team. You're used to seeing these guys. Haywood Workman came and to our school. We got to meet him. So it's you get to meet these players, so you become a part of that family, right? So that's my early stage of fandom, came from the things that were home, that felt like home, right? And it's funny because thinking back about the Colts, right? I love the Colts. Been a Colts fan forever, even through all the BS, all the bad decisions, all the bad draft picks, right? I was always a Colts fan. And I try to think back when I realized my Colts fanhood and when it first really started. And the only time that I can think about when my Colts fanhood started was with Jim Harbaugh, the comeback kid. Right? And that's when it started. It was before Peyton Manning. It was before Edgerrin James. It was before Marvin Harrison. It was when we had the comeback kid, right? And that was so exciting back then. And for a young guy that always played football, that's who I kind of looked up to. So I feel like there's this base that we put together, right? And that's going to be our home, right? That's those teams. And I feel like a lot of that deals with family, who your family loves or who your family likes. And then where you are, right? And those are going to be those two bases that typically don't change. And then I feel like outside of that, then you start to find yourself being fans of different teams, though. But I feel like that's how those two teams two teams kind of developed. But my story of fandom goes a lot further than my base of 2 teams. So that's my introduction, and that's how I got to that part. So thinking of that and thinking of the teams that were in North Carolina, you didn't feel that type of connection where those were your teams growing up, like, and those are your teams that you still stick with?
So for me, I have to show people on a map where I grew up because it is on the coast of North Carolina, small town, and there's nothing in the direct vicinity. So
all right, screen share that one too when you get a chance. So
yeah. One time I could show you, because what you would see is that there are no major cities anywhere close. So when I was a kid, before the speed limits got up to 70 on the interstates, it took us about 3 hours to get to Raleigh, right? So that's 3 hours to Raleigh. It would take us 6 hours maybe to get to Charlotte. And that's where you really have kind of all of your teams in North Carolina anyway. So there weren't really sports teams that we followed. The Hornets kind of came up in the late 80s, right? And they weren't super great. They weren't bad, but they weren't like super great. So when a team is new, it's hard to just jump on that back if you're already not invested in any teams in that state. And my parents, like you say, it's based on family. My parents weren't really following any teams, so they didn't kind of bring me into that. Of course, Carolina, UNC, they followed that, University of North Carolina. So that was something that I kind of was indoctrinated into there. But any professional teams, there just weren't any. So if you were a baseball player coming up, and that's what I was, from our part of the state, we always root for the Braves. That was who we cheered for. And I didn't have that much of a vested interest because I wasn't going down to Atlanta, which I don't know, 5, 6, 7 hours. I don't even know because we never made the trip. So how do I know, right? But like to go down there and watch a game, and I knew people that did it, so they'd be more invested in it. You know, they probably are like my friend Alex, who's in our league. They would go down and watch Atlanta Braves games, so he was more invested in the Braves, you know? For me, it's something that I watched, but I couldn't really tangibly see or feel, so I couldn't latch onto it that same way. So for baseball, which was the sport I played and followed the most, the Braves were my team, but when they won the World Series, I felt, all right, I rooted them to success. They won a championship. They don't need my fanship anymore because they're good now, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of, for me, what kind of that kind of shaped my my fandom is that my parents didn't really steer me one way or the other. My dad especially didn't really have any sort of real allegiance to any team, so I didn't really inherit any of that. So, you know, when I talked about sports, I just whoever's around, I could talk about with them. If they had teams, I could talk about it. So I was kind of more flexible in that way to talk about whatever to people. So for me, I don't consider myself to be a diehard fan of any real team because I never really had that influence growing up. But Carolina, UNC, that's the team that if I was a diehard fan, that's the closest thing I got, you know. But even last year, the Cole Anthony in the basketball thing, it was a fiasco. I watched like the Duke games last year, and that was it. 'Cause I am not afraid to tune out when things are going bad. I'll do it.
Yeah, just like, you know, I could watch them lose. I could just do something else and still
I can go out and do something fun.
Still support them. I'll watch the game later.
Growing up in the same location as your teams, how far away were you actually from like the arenas or being able to go to see the teams?
Like 10-minute drive about a 10-minute drive. So it's like a few minutes away from my house, I can get to some place where I can see the stadiums downtown. You know, like 5 minutes away, I can like drive and see the stadiums downtown. And a lot of that's just because of like downtown parking or downtown lights that I do that, right? So it's ingrained in me, right? No matter if it's just the visual image of the stadium, no matter if it's going into Kroger's and seeing like the Pacers mascot right there, no matter if the Pacers mascot is coming to your actual school, you know what I mean? And these mascots are actually like pretty cool. Like we had like a dude named Boomer that's this cat that like jumps and dunks and does whatever, right? So this dude is amazing, right? And then we had like this Colts horse dude that like can shake his belly and do all these little crazy, you know what I mean? So it's like you have all of this. And you see the players on commercials, you see them on ads, like you see Colts attire when they're going to the playoffs, when they're winning, like you see all of this stuff. So it's always reinforced. And if you like players that are on that team and you don't mind all that attention, then I think it comes naturally. But at the same time, I was a generation a little bit later. So one of the things that's interesting with the Colts is that you may not necessarily remember this, but the Colts came to to Indianapolis in 1984, and they came from Baltimore, right? So that kind of goes directly in this conversation, right? Like, what causes that fandom, right? Like, there probably wasn't that many Colts fans in Indianapolis before they came from Baltimore, right? But that relocation brought this whole new fan base and a whole new way to talk to fans or attract fans, right? Because people in Baltimore and people in Indianapolis, totally different, right? Like the team, the marketing, the marketability, like the people that you're going to have on the team are totally different. So I came at a certain time and I had cousins that were older than me, right? And those cousins that were older than me, they weren't Colts fans at all. One of them was kind of a Colts, maybe kind of a Colts fan, is more of a Colts fan now. But when I was a kid, one was Oakland Raiders fan and one was a 49ers fan, right? And you had to think about the time, right? You had Steve Young, right? You had Joe Montana, you had Jerry Rice. On the other side, you had like Tim Brown, right? You have all these different guys that are on these different teams, and those were the popular, exciting teams to watch. So my cousins kind of steered towards those teams, which was actually interesting. And believe it or not, one of the cousins that's in our fantasy league, Evan, he was the one that was the Raiders fan, right? And then, interesting story, because he is the biggest fan for one of the teams in the NFL. I'm going to tell you guys who that is. But the way that his came about was because there was an expansion team in the NFL, right? And it was interesting because when that expansion team came, I remember like one of my cousins was like, all right, more towards the Jags, and the other one was more towards the Bucks, right? And more towards the which one was it?
Panthers?
The Jags, yeah, and the Panthers, right? And then the Jags were pretty good, or weren't they good? And the Panthers kind of made it, so it was like okay, but then they kind of went down. And then after that, what ended up happening was players started changing around their fandom, right? So going from the Raiders, and then going from the Raiders to the Panthers, and then going from the Panthers to the Vikings. How do you think that he got to the Vikings, by the way? Just interesting concept, interesting thought.
I'm trying to think. Let me see. 98, that Vikings team that almost made the Super Bowl 15-1 team.
Well, honestly, it was Dante Culpepper, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because once I start looking back at his fandom and stuff and how he went about it, a lot of it went due to players, right? And that's one of the things that I started noticing is that a lot of times we end up becoming fans of teams because of the players. And that's an interesting concept now because with players switching teams so often, how does that affect fans, right? That's a big thing, right? Also, he went to that team because they got Dante Culpepper. And then after that, he switched that to go to the Bucks because they basically had Jameis. So same type of thing. But
he never rooted for Dante Culpepper on the Dolphins. He's never there.
Never that.
Yeah.
Never
my older brother is a Dolphins fan today. And I don't know if he ever had a team before that. So again, North Carolina, they introduced the Panthers in 95, I think, the 95 season.
I think it was 95, yeah.
And the same type of thing, people that were, I was 9, 10 at that time. My brother's 2 years older. So anyway, people that were already kind of aware of sports had to make a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you root for that team that's new, or do you just stick with whoever you were rooting for?
Yeah.
Normally it comes down to who the best team is. So people that were alive in the early 80s, late 70s probably would be rooting for Bay Area teams because they were really good. That makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, in mid 80s, late 80s and all that, maybe you still root for the 49ers. You start rooting for the Cowboys at that time when they started getting good.
Even
right?
some of the Dolphins too, a little bit with Marino and Mark Duper and
Yeah. I even had a Oakland Raiders starter jacket. So I mean, I know about the Oakland
Oh, you
Raiders.
was a cool kid, huh?
Yeah, man. Hey, they're starter jackets though, right?
Mm.
So I mean, everybody, everybody has their own reasons. And my brother was a big Ricky Williams fan. And I mean, of
Mm.
course, Ricky Williams was a bad dude at that time, right? Like he was a great
Yeah.
running back.
Yeah,
So
I
when he
like
got
Ricky
traded to the
Williams too.
Dolphins, my brother became a Dolphins fan, and he's still been a Dolphin, so or a Dolphins fan. So that's the interesting part because what I really wanted to ask too, as kind of the overall crux of this whole question is it better to be a fair weather fan? Is it better to be a diehard fan? What's the difference? Is there honor? Is there right? Like, why do people decide to stick with their teams as opposed to finding a team that's good at the time? Because my brother decided to be a Dolphins fan because of a player, as you talked about earlier. But the
Hmm.
Dolphins haven't been good,
Yeah.
but he stuck with the team. So he went from kind of like he jumped on the bandwagon in a sense, but then he stayed there,
Yeah.
and he's been suffering. The Dolphins just last year
Same
was a
thing.
terrible year,
Uh-huh.
right? They were looking like the worst team, and then they snuck into the like fourth pick. They somehow surprisingly weren't the worst team, and then the Bengals kind of just decided we're just going to take that. The Bengals did some things to get in there somehow, but he's been suffering with the Dolphins every year. You can ask him about the Dolphins, and he's talking about their players. He's using the
Yeah.
"we" term, right? He's really invested. And like,
It's
dude, they're
yeah.
not good. You don't have to, right? Like, what? He's not
But
from
he
Florida. We're not from
does.
Florida.
That's the thing is that you know what? Like it was interesting because like that was the next point with my cousin was that the player that he wanted or that he like invested in got him to that team, but somewhere along that line he found a culture or he found something to really connect with that team where it's like I'm going through stuff, this team's going through stuff. Like I remember memorable moments where they crushed my heart, right? Or where I was so excited, right? So just bringing fans to a team, especially when they're coming specifically with a player, well, now you're not there because they're only winning. Now you're there for the player, and sometimes that player may not necessarily do stuff. So you see all the other guys, and now I feel like you start to get invested because, like, my cousin, now he's a Bucks fan for life. He has the Brady jersey. He has like all these different, like, that's his thing. Like fantasy football, that's all he's going with. Bucks, Bucks, Bucks. And hopefully this year he does a little bit better. You know what I mean? And I know like last year you tried to mix it up to try to get a little bit of a different chance, but I feel like that's the same thing with your brother. There's probably you should ask him. Like you should ask him and be like, what was it? What was that moment where you realized that you were gonna be a Dolphins fan for life, and it was gonna be disappointing, and you were just gonna have to deal with it? Because I know I felt that with the Pirates, and I was just like, you know what, this is just who we are. Like it is what it is. Like we've sucked, I've accepted it, and yeah, that's just gonna be that.
I'll say this, that I'm not going to pick a losing team. I'm going to tell you that straight up. I'm not going to do that to myself. So what I do every year basically is like I'll find a team that I like, or every game I have a rooting interest, right? I don't necessarily, not root for anybody. As a sports fan, you're going to find some reason to root for a team, whether that be for a game or for an entire season. But you'll find the teams that are the most exciting, and you'll kind of stick with them because they excite you. They make you happy and make you want to watch the sport. So like that Vikings team with Dante Culpepper,
Yeah.
Randy Moss, I remember hearing them lose that game on the radio, I feel like, when they lost that NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
Like I was trying to find that game, and I think I heard it on the radio that one of the Andersons missed that kick, the Vikings
Morton
kicker.
Anderson or yeah.
Morton or Gary, I don't remember because they were both in the game. Either way, like when I heard that, I was like, "Oh, come on!" You know what I mean? Like I was invested in the Vikings that year because they were the best team and they had a really compelling quarterback, compelling wide receiver in Randy Moss.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were a fun team to watch, and the Falcons weren't fun. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then like I didn't really care to see the Broncos win. The Broncos weren't exciting to me, so that I was rooting for the exciting team that year, and that's just kind of how I operate as a sports fan. I try to be aware of what teams are good, what teams are bad, the general ideas, storylines going on, like what's going to happen. But, I have to find some reason to get invested or else there's going to be no fun. But one thing I will not do is stay loyal to a bad team because that's just, I don't want to be a Cubs fan. So, I'll just say this, that I personally, and you can probably understand where I'm coming from because I've already made it clear. I don't see any reason. I don't think there's any nobility, any honor in suffering for a losing team. Because in my opinion, your fandom, you give money to the team, you give your time, you give your emotions to that team. And that team rarely cares about how you feel about it personally. So if you're suffering for a team, is that team going to do something to make you suffer less? If it's a part of their plan, they'll get better. If it's not part of their plan, they'll probably continue to be bad until they have a reason not to be bad. And I think, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, you say you finish now. You say you think what?
And I think that's kind of what we were trying to figure out when I was going through, just kind of figure out what defines kind of your fans' loyalty. And I was looking at attendance, and that's where kind of I got into trying to plot attendance and see, are there events that kind of change the attendance? And is there a way to kind of quantify, this is a baseline level of fandom. These are the fans that stay. And then when the team gets good, you get a certain bump in attendance to a game or to an event on average. When things are bad, you get that sort of decrease. But is there a certain level that's the baseline that you can then define as those are our diehard fans? And when you get that bump, these are our bandwagon fans, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you get that decrease and those are bandwagon fans too. That's kind of what I was thinking about, if that's a way to quantify that or to be able to figure out.
It's interesting because like I always have this scientific mind where I'm analyzing like every word or every statement independently or together as a group. And when you started talking about some of the stuff previously, one of the things that I thought about was that, and I'll tie it into that point that you're just making about like fandom and how do you consider a real fan or a real fan base. And I feel like now I'm thinking about it is that to be a real fan, you definitely have to be there when times are hard. And there is a lot of value in that, right? But it's kind of weird, right? The reason why it's so valuable to be there in the good times and the bad is because when you have those years of losing, you have those years of just nothing. When the switch changes, right, and your team starts winning or has a chance, right, then it's that much more meaningful or valuable, right? And you can brag about your team for the whole year. When the Pirates were at the top, I think, like, I was like, yeah, that's my team. What about the Pirates? Have you heard about them, right? But, like, if the Yankees are at the top, like, you sound pretty arrogant if you're like, yeah, you see the Yankees game? Like, you see what the Yankees did? Like, oh, yeah, the Yankees are like the Red Sox. Like, you're just like, we expected to win. Like, that's what we do. Like, we had a cool time at the game. We cheered because we won, but it's not as meaningful or valuable or special for somebody that's had to watch their team like lose 80 plus games a year and 90 games. Like, it's a different meaning. So I feel like there is something with being a long-term fan for a sports team because it does find value. And those people that have always been longtime Chiefs fans found a lot more value in that championship than the bandwagon fans would ever find. So I think that's one of the things that I thought about when you were stating that part right there. So
okay, so for you, it's about long-term value, then the honor and the nobility in being a diehard fan.
I wouldn't say necessarily the honor, but it's a relationship. It's a relationship just like any other relationship. And in any relationship, you have to go through the bad moments to be able to enjoy the good. If they're just good moments all the time, then you just get bored and they don't really seem that valuable. And then after a while, you're just going to want to go to another team because the good moments just seem stale now. And that's probably why bandwagon fans exist, because they're only in there for the good moments. And they realize that the good moments aren't the full story, and they're always chasing something that they can never find because they just need to settle down. And yeah, it's getting deep.
This is Paul's relationship corner. We've learned a lot about Paul's theories on relationships.
Hey, it's another type of relationship.
How he feels that a relationship needs to be rocky in order to be fulfilling. We've learned a lot from that.
It does. I mean, if you think about anything that you are passionate about in your life, it has never been just something that's came easy and stayed easy. It's always been something that has come and been challenging, where you've invested, where you've learned from it, where it's exposed stuff or like promoted you to another level. So yeah, I feel like that's the difference for me, you know what I mean? And like my observation with fandom and fan relationships. So, but again, that's just all the things that I find for myself and my own value, you know what I mean? But I like you said, like I've had so many different teams I've been fans of over the years. Like in the NFL, not as many. I've been a fan of two other teams for the most part. That's been the Lions and that's been the Chargers. All right.
Yeah. So I'm gonna guess the Chargers because you live in San Diego. That's why I'm gonna guess the Chargers.
All right. That's a good guess.
All right. And then the Lions, you just like suffering. I can't even see why you would root for the Lions.
See, like I was thinking about like all these different times, right? And a lot of fanship comes from exposure or excitement, right? And I can't remember if it was the video game part of it or I just liked certain types of running backs because they were so interesting to me. So Barry Sanders and LaDainian Tomlinson were the two guys that made me like those other two football teams. So even when I was a Colts fan, like those teams still had a place in my heart. And then, yeah, part of me always just wanted to see the Lions do something, you know what I mean? And it just never happened. Like I liked Charles Rogers, like coming out of Michigan State. I was like, this is going to be the dude, you know what I mean? Like Megatron's like, this is going to be the dude. And then there was one more wide receiver that was up there too that I was like, yeah, this is going to, no.
Herman Moore.
No. Herman Moore was the dude. Herman Moore was the dude. But this is after Herman Moore. Like they had like a lot of like rookies that just didn't work out. So, but yeah, like it's interesting because like for me, those were more with players that I just admired, right? And I admired watching them. I admired what they did, and for their whole career, I was still a fan-ish of those teams, right? Which is interesting because now I'm wondering, would I still have been a fan of Detroit at all if LaDainian Tomlinson would have moved, or sorry, if Barry Sanders would have moved different teams, or if LaDainian Tomlinson would have been on a lot of other teams, right? Like I wasn't a Jets fan. I didn't really follow LT when he went to the Jets as much as I did when he was with the Chargers. I still kind of followed the Chargers a little bit more than the Jets at that moment, just because like I knew more people on the team. But yeah, I wonder how it would have been with Barry Sanders, because that was a whole different type of situation back then, where you didn't really see guys leaving in free agency like that, like top guys, right? And that's one of the reasons why why Barry Sanders didn't play anymore, right? Because he
just gave up.
He was like,
energy and effort just beat out of him.
He was like, I'm staying up here in Detroit with nothing.
I think that's kind of a parallel to the fandom of a team like the Lions, where you just lose your will. You just don't even want to do it. And I think that's for me why I choose not to engage so much in such fervent fandom, right? The fanaticism of it. Because I know that at some point when times get hard, and if they're bad for a prolonged period of time, that team can actually take away from your well-being, from your sense of happiness and peace. You know, like I said, I don't let that happen to me usually. And the only time that I let it happen is, say, like when UNC is bad.
Yeah.
Like I said, last year was one of those times when it was just like sad to watch the team. You know, when they first started out and we saw the first game, I was like, this team is not going to be good. And I'm not going to be happy watching this team. And I watched a few more games, but until they started losing a few games in a row, because the moment they lose like 2-3 in a row, at that point, I know this is not going to be a good year. And, you know, we always have championship aspirations. So if I know we're not going to win a championship, I'm going to watch the Duke game. I'm going to watch the ACC tournament. And then if they make the NCAA tournament, I'll watch those games. But I'm not going to watch the filler games. I'm not going to watch Boston College. I'm not going to watch Georgia Tech. You know, I'm not going to do that to myself. Because if we lose one of those games to a team that shouldn't beat us, or we lose Clemson, we lost to Clemson at home for the first time ever this year. And that's too much to handle. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm texting with my friends and we're like, that's just another thing that happened to us this year in this terrible year. Just done with it, you know? looking forward to football season because Mac Brown got us good now, right? It's like we're set we're set in football season. You never hear a Carolina fan say that ever, right? So
See.
so like that's the only team that I would let make me suffer like that. But for any other sport, I'm just not going to suffer. You know, I don't. Maybe it's just a part of me. Maybe what this fandom thing is actually exposing is our personalities and like what are we to the core, right? Because you like loyalty, you like fighting for something, you like enduring until something gets better, and then you like to reap the benefits. That's what it sounds like. For me, I clearly am not a relationship person. I clearly don't like to stick stuff out and just make it let it get better and sit through the bad parts so that I can reach the better sunshine, happy part at the end. That's just apparently that's not me. You know?
Apparently not. Oh, by the way, to anyone that's hearing this, you should know that I'm a Duke fan and Jeremy is a UNC fan. So we've always had this kind of back and forth for the whole time that we've known each other. And like,
right. And I am a UNC alumnus. Let's just say that. And you are not a Duke alumnus. So how did you become a Duke fan? Tell people that.
So for me, honestly, it's kind of weird. I feel like the first moment, like it's actually interesting for me because like a lot of stuff that happened, especially with the sports world at that time, was due to video games, right? And it's kind of weird because people like video games, like what, like why not ESPN? Like why not football? Well, the thing is that there wasn't necessarily as much exposure. People didn't have cable TV, right? Like people didn't have ESPN to watch all these sports teams that are in other states and other cities and all this other stuff. We didn't have that, right? So how we got exposure to a lot of things, unless they were on like national TV sometimes, was through video games, right? And one of the teams that I like used to love in the colors and the anthem in the stadium was actually the Duke Blue Devils. Like I liked Cameron Indoor. I like how like small it was. Like I like how close it was. Like I like the players. I liked Trajan Langdon was probably like one of the top guys. I loved his shot making. I was just like, oh yes, like this. I was busting threes before people were busting threes in the NBA. Like that was my thing. I was like, this is so smooth. Like I love this. Like I was enjoying it. And I started to be like, okay, well, who is this team? Like I like them. And then I started seeing more of them. And I feel like I just became a part of that culture. I love what the culture was for me. I love what it stood for. For me, I like the players. Even Sean Dockery, like I was like, oh, recruiting, they're coming to Duke, let's go, right? Like all of these guys, I was just like, man, like this is my school. So I followed Duke, and I still do, for college basketball. And then Purdue is my other college basketball. Went there, always wanted to be there, but Duke is just like my natural fit. And it's interesting because me and Jeremy, like, we are similar in some parts, but we definitely clash in like mentality with certain types of things. So he has that UNC side, and I got that Duke side.
For him to just choose Duke, it was just beyond me why. We would, sometimes watch the Duke UNC games together. It's just I don't understand how a person would just randomly pick Duke. Partly they were good, like they were always good. So that helps that they would be highly ranked enough in the game for a person to want to play with because nobody's playing with the worst team in the game.
I did. I used to play with UNC Wilmington. I actually did. Yeah. So UNC MC. Yeah. So yeah, I used to play with them. UNC Wilmington. Yeah, I used to play with them.
We used to joke about Trajan Langdon, man. Trajan Langdon, he was one of the first, like the light skinned brand of Duke player. Him and then Battier came after him. The Alaskan thing, Carlos Boozer, the Alaskans. We used to joke too, like Trajan Langdon would shoot every shot. He'd take the ball away from Elton Brand, his own teammates, shoot a three. He wouldn't care. Man,
he didn't care, man.
Hating on Duke. That was me and my cousin Derek used to always joke like that.
Yeah,
but,
and
just hating on Duke is a great thing. So it's good though that there is a team you can hate on like that as a part of your diehard fandom. Because there is no other team that I just automatically don't like. Like I don't like the Patriots because of their success and because of kind of the scandals they got involved in. Growing up as a baseball fan, I didn't like the Yankees because the Yankees were always good. And when the Braves won their championship, they didn't have to go through the Yankees, so that was perfect. They didn't have to do that. Even though Cleveland at the time they were stacked roster, but Atlanta beat them. Luckily, got their championship. Then the Yankees started their whole thing, and then you were like, no, not rooting for the Yankees, rooting for anybody but the Yankees.
Yeah.
So anytime they lost in the World Series, it was real fun watch. But that's kind of I'm probably more rooted in rooting against teams, come to think of it,
Yeah,
than
that's
I
an
am
interesting thing,
in
right?
rooting for teams.
Can you be a fan of rooting against the team? Like, is that a real thing? Like, is there a point where you're just like, you know what, I'm gonna let them have a season, or is it just like, I want Duke to suffer every season?
I want Duke to suffer every season. There's no time when I want Duke to win. So this is how it works, though, because when Duke won,
that's a lie because I have a good memory. But
you remember Duke won their last championships. Duke won their last championship, right?
Yeah.
We won the championship 2 years after. We made it to the championship the year after. And Duke and UNC had that weird thing where they'd alternate almost. When Duke won their back-to-back in 91 and 92, UNC won in 93.
Yeah.
Duke won the next one. Well, let me see. They won one in 2000. We weren't competitive. We had been making Final Fours around that time, though. But then the next time that we won a championship in 09, Duke won the next year. Then Duke won in 2015. We won in 2017. So there happens to be kind of a leveling of things going on, which is interesting. And maybe it has to do with kind of each side pushing the other. Mm-hmm. But I think there's no need to root for Duke to ever have a good year, because they're going to have a good year every other year, because the recruitment is just like that. Like, they're not going to be down as long as Coach K is there. So, no, I'm not going to root for them to have a good year. It's just not going to happen.
I mean, maybe not to have a good year, but yeah.
But I think that also does kind of reveal who you are. So maybe that's what's going on. Your fandom is revealing who you are to the core. And for me, I get more joy out of seeing a team fail sometimes than I do out of seeing a team succeed. Like I said, if it's college basketball, I want to see my team succeed. Any other sport, I want to see certain teams fail. I think that's it. Like, it'll be a good story if the Nuggets win the championship this year, but I'd rather not see the Heat or the Lakers win. That to me is more important. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just how it works. I don't even get it. And then maybe that's revealing about me. So maybe that's what a person's fandom actually says about them.
It's interesting because, like, for you, right, like, if there was a profiler and they were profiling Germany, they'd be like, man, like, he really loves those underdogs, right? Like, he really loves those underdogs and those guys that are, like, fighting through stories, which is interesting, right? Because, like, with UNC, that's not the story. It's not necessarily like they're the underdog, right? But that's a different type of fandom for you. But I think that it's interesting with the whole underdog thing, because there's teams that I've liked, and you brought up this point earlier, is that there's teams that we like sometimes when they're kind of like the underdog, when they're not necessarily the top. And then when they get to the top, you're just like, I want to be a fan of your team anymore, right? Like, like for the Heat,
you don't need my help.
Exactly, right? For the Heat this year, it's like, oh man, like, wouldn't that be crazy if the Heat made the playoffs? Like, oh yeah, that'd be exciting. Like, yeah, I'd like to see that. Like, oh wow, they're beating them. Like, I want them. Like, oh wow, and now you're like, they're just dominating teams. Like, I don't want to support them. Like, forget them. Like, I hope somebody beats them now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that that's kind of interesting because for me, I've had that before with the Warriors, right? Like, I used to be a Warriors fan back when Tim Hardaway was there and everything like that. So for me, it was interesting when the Warriors started becoming, like, good again. I never, like, strayed away from the Warriors all the way, but I never was, like, just, like, right on top of them, like, all the time. And then it was actually kind of exciting when they drafted, like, Steph Curry or whatever. Didn't necessarily know what he was going to be or whatever, but it was actually interesting with that part. And then as the team started doing better, it was like, okay, cool. Like, this is a fun team to play with in video games. Again, 2K, right? And it reestablishes your favorite people, right? So, and that's an interesting point, is that video games and media have a big influence on who you end up becoming fans of. But just to cut that story short, like, once they started winning and won championships, I was like, I don't even want to use them anymore. Like, I'm not even that much of a fan. Like, they don't need, like, again, like, they don't need my fanship. Like, they're good. Like, they don't need anybody cheering for them. They're solid. Maybe that's what it is too, because the Bucks are always going to need somebody to cheer for them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I can talk about that rooting for the underdog. like I think I put it on our little document that one of my first memories was rooting. I made a bet with my older brother. I was like, David, if the Bills don't win, if they lose the Super Bowl, one of the Super Bowls, I won't play Nintendo for a week. And I don't know, I must have been like 5 or 6. I had to be. And I don't know, I guess he accepted the bet. I don't know, but they lost, right? Because they lost their 4 Super Bowls in a row.
Yeah.
I kept playing Nintendo, you know what I'm saying? I was back playing Mario, no problem. And so like I remember that because I did always somehow gravitate to the underdog. And that's just one of the first times. But mostly if there's going to be any sort of single game, I intuitively know who the favorite is and I root for the other team. And maybe I just like to see a team that's not supposed to win pull it off. Maybe I like to see the mechanics of it and how an upset happens. And maybe I just don't like that people like to root for teams. Maybe I'm so much of a non-fan, like a diehard fan, that I don't like that other people are, and I don't understand the psychology.
I don't like that you guys decide that one team's valuable enough that you should give all your support and time and energy to them. Like that's ridiculous. Like, you believe in relationships or something? No.
Say what?
I was just joking around because of that relationship conversation that I was saying earlier. It's like, what do you believe in relationships or something? Like, want to invest in these things?
I don't know. Maybe if they lose, then you'll stop doing it. You know what I'm saying? You'll stop actually rooting for teams that way, because I don't like that you do it. I don't know. I really don't understand. But that's kind of.
I mean, it's just. I mean, I think there is a certain part about like you said, that loyalty, that part of it, right? Like I would feel like maybe a cheater or like unvalued. Like I wouldn't have as much of a significance. Say if the Colts this year, if they like drop Andrew Luck and I was like, all right, I'm never going to be a Colts fan, or Andrew Luck left and they like didn't make the playoffs and I was like, I'm never going to be a Colts fan again. And then they started winning and I was like, okay, now I'm a Colts fan again. To me, I'd probably just be like, they won a Super Bowl. It's like, oh, that would have been cool. Like they sucked for a little bit, but it wouldn't be as exciting because I wouldn't be like, you know what? Like I remember when I was almost about to leave being a Colts fan. You know, like you could always get to the door. Like, and then I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it one more season. Like that good old give it one more season. Like that. Yeah, it's valuable. You know,
that's how it works, though. That's the relationship analogy again, because. You know, if you ever say, like, I ain't never going to talk to this person again, I ain't never going to text this person, you delete that number, but you memorized it. You know what I'm saying? You have one bad night and you calling it or you texting or whatever you're doing, right? It's like you backsliding at some point and y'all back. And then you say, all right, we'll give it one more try. Go through the same stuff you went through all along.
I know.
It's familiar.
Like I'm not even gonna watch this game. Like I saw how they did last game. I don't have time to deal with this argument that I'm gonna have with them during this game. So
same old stuff.
I'm just gonna chill. I'm gonna watch another team so I don't have to be disappointed, and then I'll deal with it later.
But the other team just don't feel as comfortable. There's something familiar, something that feels right about that team. So you go back to it, but you know it's gonna be the same old stuff. You just gotta decide.
Yeah, you've already figured out that you can deal with the same old stuff. You just don't want to.
Yeah, you don't want to, but if you got to, okay.
Yeah, and you found something that works long term. Like sometimes you're gonna be there, sometimes you deal with it, sometimes you don't. Like hey, it's always ups and downs. You know, you got to deal with them. So
that's crazy, man. I don't know. You got to think about it. What percentage of diehard fans are married versus diehard fans that aren't? You know what I'm saying? Or like even have never been married? Because I'll just put it out there. I've never been married, right? Yeah. And I don't think I've been close, really. And again, we're using this relationship analogy. Is that can you take anything from that? Or is there a level of commitment that you need to a fandom that you can then apply to a relationship, or vice versa, that then can shape how you root for a team?
Yeah, it's like once you become like a dad and like you get married, you're just like I'm settling down and I'm going to settle for this team and that's going to be it. I ain't going nowhere else. Cause I feel like maybe that could be a thing. I bet people that get married and have kids or get married, I feel like a lot of times, like they probably stay committed to one team. And not necessarily even just for that specific reason, but say if you're a UNC fan, right? Say if Jamie doesn't watch college basketball, but you want to watch a UNC game, what's going to happen? You're going to go there. She's gonna come with you. You're gonna watch the game. You're gonna like cheer. You're gonna be mad about certain stuff. You're gonna tell her why you're mad, and then she's gonna start to get used to why you're mad and the things that frustrate or bother you. And then they're gonna start frustrating, bothering her, and then you guys are both gonna be UNC fans. Then you're both gonna be watching the games, and you're gonna start building a bond. And I feel like that's the same thing that probably happens with dads and kids. They're like, oh, I'm gonna get him like Aaron Rodgers jersey, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then they just start building that type of relationship. So I bet there is some type of correlation between the two, not necessarily just because of that commitment, but I definitely think that it's that bond that starts to be built with that settling down type mindset, which is interesting, man. Look at this. Psychology 104, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish I could have gotten more into psychology. I wanted to, but I thought, hey, I should probably do something a little hard sciencey. You know, no offense to psychology. I really do like psychology. But another thought about fans, whether you're a diehard fan or a bandwagon fan, is the economic implication of it.
Ooh.
And I was just thinking, for a team, the backbone of a team has to be its diehard fans, right? Economically. Because, you know, if you have ticket sales, you have to have some people that come to the game. And the Jacksonville Jaguars have a hard time selling tickets. Their games are blacked out in their local areas because they want people to go to the game, I guess, and there's not enough people that like the game. And you have other teams that, you know, a diehard fan, say for the Cowboys, is going to talk about how great the Cowboys are. And like you said, he's going to either influence maybe his children, maybe he influences his friends, his significant other. They are the tastemakers, in my opinion, right? When you use that, you think about that. A diehard fan is a tastemaker, has to be, that can then get other people to watch that team and interested in that team, which can then help that team grow in profile and, of course, flourish economically. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that you don't necessarily like become a Cowboys fan. You kind of get conned into it. That was going to be one of the things. But I think that that's one of those things that's kind of complex. But for a lot of teams and a lot of markets, that die hardness is going to be critical, right? Those small market teams, that die hard fan is going to be something that you can't necessarily go without, right? Because they're going to keep everything that you're doing like viable, right? So I feel like in Indianapolis, there was a lot of diehard fans, right? Games were sold out forever, right? While Peyton Manning was there, like you couldn't get a seat. And the line was super long. And the only time that tickets were actually available for people to kind of like really get in there was the year that Andrew Luck got hurt and we weren't sure if he was going to come back or not. Like that was the only time when seats were actually even available, right? And then once he came back and did stuff, like they were sold out again, right? And that was just those diehard fans, right? They were just Colts all day, every day. No other form of diehard fan like the Raiders and the Cleveland Browns, though. I feel like those and the Vikings, man, those, yeah. For teams that like have done really bad at times, like those are probably like the top diehard fans. I mean, you could say Cowboys, but I feel like some Cowboys fans just
there's no worse group of fans that have had it worse than Cubs fans, Chicago Cubs. To me, that fandom suffered the most because they went over 100 years without a championship. Now, the Lions might get there. You know, the Lions could very well get there, but it's going to take another 50 years or so. But there were Cubs fans that were born and Cubs fans that never saw the Cubs win a championship, right? Like, they might have saw them make the World Series, but they didn't see them win because they didn't for 100 years. So I think that's the longest suffering because not only had there been several generations that hadn't seen them win a championship, no one had any hope that they would win a championship in their own lifetime, right? The fact that they did it in 16 or something like that. Was it 16?
I can't remember. I remember when the guy caught the ball and messed up their whole playoff.
Yeah. Steve Bartman. Yeah, that was toxic because of the loyalty of the fans they were so on edge about possibly getting to the World Series that it made them bully a person and make him not even be able to be a fan anymore, a person who had been a loyal
Wow,
fan to the
man.
Cubs. It's just so that I think that's just the fan base that felt it the most and was hurt the most because of the gap between the championships and the fact that they lost all hope, and even the Lions, it's been so long since the Lions have won because they didn't win, well, they haven't won since the 50s or something like that, maybe. But there's at least some time where you can be like, well, there are people that saw them win a championship that might still be alive, or my father saw them win. I don't think the Cubs had even like maybe your grandfather saw them, maybe your great, right? It was just like
Yeah.
generations.
See, I think that you make a beautiful point. And like I love when we're having these types of conversations because they make me think about like so many different things, right? And anybody that's listened to these podcasts has probably heard me say something similar to this before. But what I think that you just made me understand is that a lot of fandom comes with storylines, and there has to be some storyline that you're attached to. And as long as that storyline is going on, you can kind of be a fan for that team. And when that storyline is gone, then you're out, right? And I feel like that's probably the biggest thing is that there has to be a storyline. And when you're talking about these Cubs, well, they have this storyline. We haven't won in a long time. They still ain't winning. So it's still like, yeah, right? We're almost making it there. My grandparents saw this. Like, I want to be there to see it again, right? There's
Yeah.
a storyline. And because of that, because of their struggling, in a sense, and because of their market and because of their success as well in certain times, that allowed them to build up that fan base and to actually continue that fan base, which is actually really interesting to kind of like come down to that point. And I feel like that even applies for your thing with teams, right? Like you can like a team for a certain amount of time, then when they ain't winning, you're like, well, that storyline is over. Like, y'all some losers. I don't like that storyline. I don't want to hear the storyline of a loser.
Yeah.
So you're just like, all right, forget that. Like, tell me about a winner storyline. And then you can invest in that because you like that part of that feel of that story. So,
Or it's also like, think about the Boston Red Sox and think about their story. And they had a similar story to the Cubs. They were also cursed. The Cubs and the Red Sox were both cursed franchises, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the Red Sox got over their curse. And not only that, they became dominant in their sport to a point where people are like Red Sox fans, y'all need to stop. Like, nobody cares anymore that y'all keep winning. Because the Red Sox are winning the World Series every 5 years now, consistently,
Mm-hmm.
Like, they get a new manager, he wins the World Series immediately, then he gets fired, and then they got to get a new one, and it seems to be happening because they understand how to win now, and they're no longer that downtrodden franchise. I mean, in '03, when they won their first championship since 1918 or whatever, everybody was rooting for them when they came back from down 0-3 against the Yankees, and they did so much to overcome. They had to do something major to beat that curse, right? To beat that institutionalized low self-esteem and lack of faith that they could win. But they did it, and everybody, was like, I was watching it in my college dorm. We're like, oh, everybody's loving it, everybody's excited. But then once they become the top of the hill and they become the favorite to win, that storyline is gone, and they actually seem a little bit, like you said, arrogant. So it's funny how that works. Like the Yankees and the Red Sox actually aren't that different anymore. They used to be arch rivals. They used to be on completely different sides of the coin, but now they're more similar than they are different.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that's actually kind of interesting too, is that points to like different levels of fanship or different types of fandom, right? If your team is just literally typically bad, you're a fan, but you're like a quiet fan, right? Like if your team is like not winning, but they consistently are solid or good, and there's a bunch of you, there's a big group, and you're just like cocky or whatever. And then if they lose, you're just like, yeah, whatever. Like we're still better than you. You know what I mean?
Look at the banners.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, like I feel like that's one of the things with the Cubs is that for them, because they were able to start making the playoffs, because they had some types of years up and down, maybe they were able to like build up that fandom, and it became more than just watching the Cubs. Like you're a Cubby. Like they have a whole like area up there designated just to baseball with bars, with games, with TVs, restaurant, right? Like Wrigleyville is like a thing. It's not necessarily just the Cubs. Like you're a part of this whole environment, and they've embraced that and made it a part of a culture. So now being a Cubs fan is a culture. It's not necessarily just that fandom part. So I don't know, man. I think that there's so many different interesting storylines that related to that. Especially when I think about like my own like fandom and stuff like that, for sure. So
yeah, it is interesting.
Oh, go ahead. What were you gonna say?
It was interesting that there's a sense of identity and belonging that goes with that. And so I guess maybe for some people it's easier to get that. You get that, but you can also invest in multiple teams that way. Mm-hmm. Some people maybe can't do that. But yeah, there is a sense of identity and belonging. And that is a really good point that you bring up in terms of how, why you would be a fan of a long-suffering team. Well, because you can say I am a blank fan and I have all these other people to commiserate with me.
Yeah. And somebody to go with the storyline or be a part of like that whole little like that process or whatever, right? Even if you go to another state, like one thing to point out real quick before I ask you a question is that it's interesting, like living in San Diego is something different than a lot of other cities because San Diego is such a tourist city and there's so many people that have moved from other cities is that every single sports team pretty much has a bar. So Boilermakers, Purdue has a bar, Colts have a bar, and they're not even the same bar. And then some places they have more than one bar, right? So there's marketability in that fandom as well, right? And it was actually interesting to see that they like took that to the next level when you went out of state as well, depending on like where you go. But one of the questions that I had for you was, we already kind of like talked about some of the different fanship and like the fandom stuff. What is your take? Because we talked about NFL, we talked about baseball. What is your take on the NBA? Because I didn't get too much on the NBA. Like, what types of teams have you been fans of before? And can you think about or remember why you became a fan of those teams, by the way?
I think when it comes to the NBA, I'm just like your typical casual fan, basically, because if I root for a team, it's going to be a team that is good and has already been good, so that I'm rooting for them to complete some sort of goal or, whether it's like a back-to-back or a three-peat or something like that. So I remember, the Bulls, and I was rooting for the Bulls to win because obviously everybody rooted for the Bulls unless you were from like Detroit or Indianapolis or something.
Yeah.
If you weren't a direct like rival at that point, you're rooting for the Bulls. And then, after say Jordan retired, I would root for Iverson, right? I root for players too. I rooted for the 76ers against the Lakers, especially knowing that the Lakers were favored. So I didn't root for the Lakers ever. I've never rooted for the Lakers, partly because of their history and they've already won a bunch of championships, and partly because every time that they get the type of press that they're getting, say now, they're overwhelming favorites to win the title. So the Kobe and Shaq Lakers, never rooted for them. I did root for Shaq when he was on Orlando, though. So, it just depends. It depends on the story. It depends on who's the favorite, who's good and who's not.
Yeah.
So rooted for Iverson back then. Let's see. Early part, I didn't really have much of a rooting interest in the years I was in college, like 04 to 08. I didn't really have much of a rooting interest because I didn't just watch a lot of sports in college. I was just kind of buckled down at that point. But I think I did root for the Heat when they were together because it was an exciting show to watch. You know what I mean? So I did like to watch them. Maybe I didn't root for them to win, but I definitely watched them. And the same goes for the Warriors, especially when KD was up there. It was the best show to watch. So I think when it comes to basketball now, I'm more into what teams are fun to watch. So I'm just like, whoever's the most exciting, everybody talks about the NBA pass team or league pass team or whatever, right? That's kind of how I watch basketball. Like whoever's the most interesting team to watch and most exciting team to watch, I'll usually try to watch that team. But I don't really have, say, a team that I root for consistently, especially now. I just don't.
Yeah. And I think that is very, very interesting because when we talked about how we first kind of started out, or like at least with me, with my fanhood, like who I'm like really following, it was because I kept seeing these things all the time. Teams stayed together. I was involved in these storylines. I knew what was going on the background and on the foreground or whatever. Like I knew all of these things, right? And now with the way that the current NBA is, not even touching the NFL for now, but with the way the current NBA is, those storylines that we once were a part of are changing a lot more often and a lot more frequently. And it doesn't necessarily feel like the same game. So I guess a question is, how does that start to affect fanship or fandom? And is it okay? Like, what things need to be kept in mind in those types of situations? How do you reach out to fans? How do you keep fans in this type of new market? Is it about creating interesting storylines? Is that why we see a lot of the things that we see? So I guess that's kind of like my question. Little jumbled, but you smart. You'll be able to break it apart and tell me what you think about some of those topics. So
I'm gonna give you an answer. It might not answer your question, but I'll say something. What I think, like, okay, so I sent you those figures, those graphs that I made, and it was just talking about how fandom, or not fandom, how attendance of certain teams' games have changed over time for the past like 10 years.
yeah,
And there's always these key moments that changes the percentage of fans. I did it based on the capacity, maximum capacity of the stadium. And there's always key moments, in at least like the past 10 years I've noticed, there's a key moment that says the team is good now, fans should start coming. Or the team is bad now, fans will stop going there. And so basically, to me, what it says is, and this is kind of in general, I think what should happen, if the team is good, they will get fans. And I think fans should hold the team accountable. And if the team isn't good, don't go to that team's events unless that team wants to offer a better product. So you shouldn't always be that way, of course. Like sometimes you do need to go to the games because you support the team. But I think that's what the diehard fans do. And I think when you look at the other fans, they're not going if the team isn't good. You know, the Cubs, if they weren't putting a good product, they were still selling out tickets, but the morale was low until they started putting out a better product. You know, the Red Sox, same thing. So I think what needs to happen is that the front office needs to make sure that the team is competitive. Doesn't have to be a winner. I mean, the Pacers were never an ultimate champion, right? At least not in the NBA days, right? So what they've been able to do, though, is put exciting teams on the floor, put competitive teams on the floor, so that when they had their rivalry games with certain teams, you know, they were going back and forth with, say, the Knicks or the Bulls, people wanted to see that. They had an exciting star. They at least, like, had someone that people wanted to go see, and that worked. So I think you have to just build excitement around the team. Number one is winning. That's the first and foremost thing. But even if you don't win, at least have personalities and a culture that gets people to win. And I say winning is number one because when that player leaves, you'll still have something that the fans want to go see, because players are moving. And that's, I think, what you're hinting at is players are moving. They're changing teams so quickly, and their fans leave right along with that player. But you gotta win games, build a winning culture, and make it exciting, and then people will come. And then you should be able to withstand any of the fluctuations in personnel movement, that type of thing.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think is actually interesting. I think that teams can do it with, I guess, excitement, right? Is one way to put it. And I think that it also has to be like excitement for the specific market that you're in, right? And that's one of the things that some teams just aren't able to do, right? And creating storylines that are going to be good for whatever market it is that you're trying to pull out of, right? So, for example, say with the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? Like they had a good storyline. Kid from Akron is playing with us, like trying to lead us to an NBA championship. Everyone in the world wants to see that. This guy like grew up an hour away, right? And he's going to bring a championship to this small city or whatever, right? Like that is an interesting storyline that everybody can be a part of. But the storyline of the Knicks drafting RJ Barrett to be the savior is not that interesting. You know what I mean? Especially not if you're in New York, right? Like it does nothing for your marketability. Even it says that like the Knicks have some young stars that are doing okay. Doesn't matter. Like, it's a boring story for New York's market. You know what I mean? And that storyline affects the guard. So maybe people go to the games, but eventually they're going to stop going because it's just not interesting to their life, or even to talk about with their friends. Like, oh, did you watch that Knicks game? No. Like, no, I didn't watch the Knicks game. You know what I mean? But again, like, if they were good and you say, oh, you watched the Knicks game? Son, what's, bruh?
Yeah.
You Barrett? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you have to make sure that you have storylines for your market, and you have to understand what your market is. And you have to understand where you can actually expand to and why you can expand to those different types of markets. And again, for small teams or small towns or small markets, they definitely have to be smart with how they're doing it. And I feel like continuity, I guess, or continuation is very important to those types of markets, more than it is for the big markets. Like, you can keep bringing superstars into LA and there's always going to be some interesting storyline right there. Even with them getting beat by the Nuggets, that's an interesting storyline. They may even get more fans just because people want to see what they're going to do in the off season and next year. You know, I think it's interesting. I think it's definitely not a fluid thing with the whole fandom thing, but yeah, like I said, like, I've definitely a lot of interesting storylines that are out there with fans. So
I think that's a good way to put it, is the storyline thing. And normally I don't like the idea of that. When I think about the national media and the storylines that they use in order to get people interested and to, you know, look at their games on TV or read their articles online, I think that is, to me, sometimes a bit much because sometimes they reach. But I think you're right in that you need something to sell your guys you draft, or else it's not going to work. Either you draft them and say, this is the final piece. That's always something, right? This is the final piece to a championship. Or you talk about their individual talents and their individual greatness and how that can lead to more of an entertaining product. So anything you do, you have to make sure that it does create excitement. And I think that is a really good point. Now, I mean, RJ Barrett is the Maple Mamba, right? He's already comes with a level of excitement he should bring to Madison Square Garden. I don't know. I never heard them call him the Maple Mamba after that. I don't get it. I mean, yeah, I'm pretty sure that was him, right? So
yeah, I think so.
And I think that something else that I had been thinking about was, of course, just that fans do have the ability to hold the team accountable for winning and losing by how they attend the games. And so I think that if a team starts to see their attendance go down, I think that's one of the things they should look at is, well, maybe we're not delivering an exciting enough product and we're not winning enough games in order to fill our arena. So I think that is something that a fan can do. And I think it's incumbent upon the diehard fans, especially, to make sure that they're really demanding a good team, that they don't just go just because. Now, you can always support the team. You can buy the jerseys, you can watch on TV, but as far as attendance, that might be one of the few ways that they can actually show that they're happy with the product or not. And of course, it can help. But on the flip side of that, there is also an honor that I've really started to understand a little bit more now about the identity, the honor that comes in being a fan and the community that you get. Like, there's a lot of things that I think that I'm missing by not having that same community, by not being such a devoted fan to any team except for the Tar Heels. So that's my one fan community that I get. And it has helped me, find something. Like, when I go to new areas, there's always some sort of alumni group of UNC. Yeah. So that's always good. And it's just like the bars that you have in San Diego for your certain teams. So it always does help to have that community there. And by being a fan, you can get that community. So I've gotten, I think, a little bit more of a respect for that. And there's also a weird thing about, like, is jumping from exciting story to exciting story just kind of a way to get a dopamine high? Is there something with that, Am I just being kind of am I chasing the dragon? Is that what's going on right now? Like, what's going on here?
I think part of it is, right? And it's weird to say that, right? But, like, I think once you start thinking about it, it's like, what storylines do we get involved in? Why do we get involved in them? It's like either people are talking about them, or we find some type of value in them. And seeing a Ja Morant dunk is like, wow, like I need to see more of that. Like that brought a really good feeling to my body.
Yeah.
Like this little like short dude coming through with this same tenacity as some of the greats before, and just like it's just him against whoever, right? And like that's a mindset that I can follow. I can be like, yes, like I like that. I like that mentality, and I'm a supporter, right? And that's actually one of the questions that I came here with you to figure out today is that, am I a Ja Morant fan or am I a Memphis fan? Because like I like other guys in Memphis. Like I like the way that they play. Like I like them being a young team. And what it's starting to remind me of is my initial attraction to the Clippers, right? Like the Clippers, I didn't really talk about why I was initially attracted to the Clippers, but it was because of all the Duke guys that were on the team, right? Mm. And then I liked how they played, and I liked all the other guys that started to come together, and they were like this young team with energy. They had swag. They had some type of like demeanor, identity. And I felt like for me at that point in time, like that's what I needed to see. Like it kind of reminds me of a team that was like a little bit ahead of their time with how they were built as this young, fun team, right? Like you had them, you had Orlando Magic, right? A young, fun team. But if you think about the other teams that were there, they were all these old teams that had already been established. They had all these old guys that were starting. All these young guys were just riding the bench, you know? And I feel like that was something at that time that I could like definitely stand behind. And I feel like I'm seeing that same thing with Memphis. They have this young group of guys that's interesting. And I feel like for me, maybe I'm a Memphis fan because that storyline to see what happens with these guys is very interesting. Does Jaren Jackson develop his defense? Can he stop fouling people? Jaren, can you stop fouling people, man? We like seeing you play. Can you just stop fouling them? I know you can get better. Shout out to Jaren Jackson. He's doing a really good job. Get back from that injury healthy. So, but then you have Dylan Brooks, right? You have Ja Morant. You have all these young guys, and it's like, what pieces are they going to add? You know, so at this point, I'll say that I'm both a Ja fan and I'm a Memphis fan. I'm excited to see what they're going to do next. And I'm happy that that debate is settled because it's easier for me to figure out now.
There wasn't no debate when you was talking to yourself the whole time. Hey, am I this or am I that? Okay.
Hey, isn't that how most debates go?
No, I have some input. All right.
Oh,
so
okay,
first of all, I wanted to ask. We talking about the Corey Maggette Clippers that we're talking about?
Yeah, Corey Maggette, Elton Brand,
yeah,
Darius Miles, yeah, that whole group.
Yeah.
You might even have Katino Mobley on that team too. Yeah, they had a lot of guys. Yeah, I like the way that they play for sure.
Yeah. All right, just making sure. I figured that was what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But what I think is I think it's a thing that people do. It's rationalizing. It is convincing yourself of one thing when it might not actually be true. Because talking about Ja Morant, you are definitely a Ja Morant fan. You've talked about Ja Morant for I don't know how long.
And
you love seeing him play. You're a huge Ja Morant fan, but
sure.
You have to watch Ja Morant play with a team full of other people, and you're like, well, and maybe in your head you're thinking, well, if I'm going to watch him play, I might as well try to get something else out of it. Try to appreciate the greater team, you know. So
yeah.
I can see why. I like Dylan Brooks in college. I thought he was a good player. And so, yeah, I can see why. He's a really talented player. Jaren Jackson Jr., high draft pick, really talented player also. And I can't even remember the other guys on the team. I mean, there's a lot of good players on the team, though, but I can't remember them right off the top.
Yeah, but that's the three that are going to make the storylines right there. Those three main ones.
So the point being, it's easy to say, well, I like this one player. I can probably get down with the rest of the team. So I can see that. Again, we're using the relationship analogy. It's easy to see you have one or two qualities that person has that you like. Mm-hmm. And then maybe you like, I can talk myself into the whole package. You know, I can do that. But you know, if Ja Morant gets traded, what are you going to do?
Well, I mean, that's I'll bring that back. So 2 parts. First of all, I like Jaren Jackson and was interested in seeing what he was going to do before Ja got on the team. And then I liked Ja when he was in college, and I liked him when he got to Memphis. So like that
It's
was
okay.
like
It's okay. It's okay. I'm not criticizing you.
no. So that was two parts to me, right? So it's like for me, it was kind of like, all right, I already like one player on the team. I like another player that's on there, and I'm very interested. And then like that point that you made is very valid, right? Like I like watching these guys. Like, what else does this team have to offer? Because they've got my attention. So let me see if I can learn some more about them. Oh, I'm learning some more. They got this dude named Dylan Brooks at, oh, wow, this could be interesting. Like, let's see where this goes, right? And I feel like that, exactly, that's the same thing as like a relationship. Like, oh, she has like a cute face, a cute smile, awesome personality, really good background. Like, let's see where else this goes. Okay, cool. She's also a UNC fan, right? Like, okay, all right, nice. She's also a scientist. Okay, cool, right? It's the same thing.
You know, but her backup center is Marc Gasol, and he's old now, right? So
yeah,
like,
she has an annoying laugh. Like,
yeah,
she has an
exactly. You
annoying
can
laugh.
ignore
Whatever
you can ignore
it is.
some of the things that
Exactly,
might
right?
be, you know, like, hey, this team actually isn't really built to go that far in the playoffs. Maybe we're not built to go that far in the playoffs.
But
You know?
that's the thing, right? It's like you're like, yeah, she has this annoying laugh, and like if I can get over that annoying laugh and just see that it's a part of this really dope team, then I'll be like, you know what, that annoying laugh's okay. Like it's not a starter anyway. It's like
Right.
it just comes out. Right?
Right, but you know, but if her amazing personality is Ja Morant and that personality goes bad somehow, or if the cute face goes bad, which it will because that's what happens when we get older, maybe that's not the, you know, then you're left with the backup center who's not good in that annoying laugh. Are you going to stick with the team? Are you going to stick with that thing, right? Because some of those things are there to stay, and some of those things are temporary.
I feel like a prime example of that is Derrick Rose, right? Derrick Rose is that example. Derrick Rose was that guy that came along from high school, top rated, goes to college, goes to Memphis. Memphis. And then dominates there, right? And has like this crazy career. Goes #1 overall, like wins Rookie of the Year, youngest MVP, like all this stuff. This storyline is just building up. There's so much to like about that. Bringing Chicago back to greatness, then slash, and it's just out the window, right? Well, what happens at that point? Yeah, it is kind of sad because at that point, a lot of the fans left, right? Like there was nothing that was intriguing enough to stay around for, right?
Yeah.
And you didn't have that loyalty because you weren't as invested in the storyline of the team as a whole. You were only invested in the storyline of part of the team, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the thing. And that's when fandom happens for longtime fans, is when they get invested in the team storyline compared to the players. But a lot of times it takes that player to get a fan invested in the team. You can see that in the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes, same type of story. But again, like I said, like I think that Derrick Rose example is a perfect example of what could happen when the situation seems like it's going to the sky and then your fandom is just rocked by it ain't there no more.
Yeah. And I think that was kind of the point I was going to that you made, was that a player often gets you into the team and then you can root for that team for long term. And I think for me, that's the difference. I root for players when I when I do root for a team. It's going to be for the players. It's going to be for, like the Heatles. They had a cool collection of players at that time. I really like the fact that Chris Bosh was finally getting his due when he wasn't, looked at as a great player, and he saved that team a lot with his rebounding and his defense, and people didn't give him the credit, right? Or like even with Dwayne Wade kind of aging, but showing that he still had what it took when it mattered. That was an interesting team, and I rooted for that team. And when they broke up, I was just like, hey, I rooted for those players and not for the Heat, and I'll just be honest with it, And I think for me, I'm so like brutally honest with myself about things, and that I will just be okay with that I'm rooting for this player. When KD was on the Warriors, I was rooting for KD on the Warriors. I wasn't rooting for the Warriors. Like, if the Warriors get good again, that's fine, but I'm not going to feel the same way about them as I did when they had KD. And I know we differ on that because we had a nice conversation about our feelings about that whole thing. But for me, it's just like it is the players that matter. It's the players that drive my interest. And so if there's a collection of players that I like, then I'll root for that team as a collective, yes. But when they're gone, I'm not going to root for the team anymore. KD's on Brooklyn. I'll probably watch Brooklyn a little different when he plays. You know what I mean? Because I'm more interested. I like him as a player and what he can do. But it just depends on the collective at that point. It's not necessarily that team that I'll stick with.
Yeah, that was interesting because like you made me think about like what kind of facilitates the things that we invest in, right? And you're talking about these players and like having the group of players together and how those kind of intrigue you to like go for that team. And I was thinking about my situation with like having my main team and then also the other like little side teams. And I was wondering, I was like, maybe like those side teams facilitate something that I'm not getting with my main team.
Wow,
and I realized
we're doing it again. We're doing it again. Relationships.
But then I realized like that they weren't like it wasn't about that at all. It was just like another interesting storyline. Like the Lions weren't doing nothing. The Chargers weren't going nowhere. Like none of my teams was winning nothing. Like I just like had those storylines that were there because maybe there wasn't enough storylines. And like maybe your thing was just like write a letter to the team at the beginning of the season. Like, I like your storyline. Don't mess it up. You got me as a fan for the season. But if it's over, then it's over. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I definitely like to root for teams and individuals that I think can do it. You ever like, I bring up tennis because I really do like tennis. And there are certain tennis players that are always almost there, but not quite. And I root for those players. And most of the time they never make it there. Do you know Gael Monfils? He's French and he's one of the
tall dude.
Yeah. Tall guy. He's got kind of like short dreads. He might actually cut it off now, but he's one of the most entertaining players. He's one of the most athletic players. He hits huge shots. Forehand, backhand, and serve and all that. He's just fun to watch, but he suffers from nerves so bad that when he gets toward the end of a tournament, quarterfinals or semifinals, he just almost can't even play because he's so nervous.
He ain't no closer.
Yeah, exactly. Like I used to root for him a lot, right? But now I just can't anymore because I understand what it is, And like Nick Kyrgios, another guy, big, talented guy, Australian, same deal. He's got a huge serve. He's considered one of the most talented players, but I think he struggles with nerves so bad that he acts like he doesn't care. He's like, oh, I like basketball better than tennis anyway, right? He has to play it off because he gets so nervous. And that's another guy that it's hard to root for because you just know that he's not going to be able to take it all the way. And for me, that's like, I'd like to invest in certain players. And tennis is hard because when those guys, when they get nervous, man, tennis is such a hard sport. It's not intuitive. You just can't do tennis things when you're nervous, right? It's not like, a basketball, you get nervous, you got teammates, right? Boxing, maybe you get nervous, but you still can punch people. But tennis is not a intuitive action in a way that you can just do it when you're just full of nerves. So it's hard to root for people knowing that they're going to let me down. And it's sad because I want them to win, but I have to pull off. I have to get off the train so I don't get, hurt.
That just get pulled down because of y'all some losers.
Yeah, exactly. Like that'll bring me down.
Do you know my value?
They say it's self-preservation, But, I think also maybe I'm just also looking for a lot of those different, like I said, a lot of those different little stimuli and all that stuff, like you were saying, that you're missing from your own team.
Yeah. I think that one thing to take away from this that I feel we both do, and this doesn't depend on what level of fandom you have, I feel like it's still something that's there. Everyone wants whatever team they are to win a championship in whatever storyline they approach. And I feel like for yours, it's like the year-to-year ones are more interesting because you're like, this is a possibility. This team can have a really cool story. They can win the championship. I can see it from this whole part. And then when I go back and I remember it, I can like think about these whole different types of possibilities. And with me, it's that same thing. Like I still think about the Colts winning, but I realize that it's not going to happen this year. But that mindset that they still can do it, they still can make it happen eventually is like something that's valuable to me. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's one of the things that keeps people going as well. Like that just storyline of actually having that chance to win a championship. And the long-term fans, maybe for them, they're okay to wait for it as long as it's interesting enough. And for the ones that aren't, then maybe that's a situation where they're just kind of like, I'm just here for the storyline for now. And as long as it goes okay, then I'm good for it. So,
yeah. I have a lot of respect for people that can hunker down and root for one team year after year, and that can struggle with the team, that can enjoy in its successes, but also commiserate with the team when it doesn't do well, that can stay steady. I have a lot of respect for that. I came into it like, it's probably not the wisest thing, but people are built different. Me, I'm an anxious person by nature. I need to minimize sources of anxiety and sources of stress for myself. And maybe that's also a big reason why I root the way I root. I have to kind of distance myself. I used to get really, really involved and really charged up about certain things. But in order for me to be at my best, I need to kind of back away from that stuff, So I think, if you can do that, if your, way of your normal level of anxiety is so low and you're such a, you're not highly sensitive like me, I guess, you can deal with that and you can stay loyal and you can go through those things. And so I have a lot of respect for that. And so I guess it's, pretty much to each his own, right? That's the way to really sum it up. If you can do that and that's how you want to do, that's good, because you're very much needed for a team to survive economically. The team needs your money, which is, I don't know, team has a lot of money, but they still need your money to survive,
and support. I guess. Their money and support, right?
And in return, they give you excitement and happiness and joy and fulfillment that you don't get from other areas of your life, And it's a way, I guess, you can invest in a different relationship other than your committed one that you don't get in trouble about. So whatever.
Yeah.
We keep taking it back there. I don't know anything about that. We just keep taking it back anyway.
No. I feel like, first of all, appreciate that part. And I don't know. I feel like the thing is that when we think about a lot of situations in life, we realize that it's a lot simpler than we think it might be. And a lot of things just deal with relationships, interplay. If it's something that you're dealing with, a class that you're taking, what is your relationship between that? If it's with a job, what is your relationship? If it's with a fan base, what is your relationship, or with a team? And I feel like a lot of the general things play that same type of role. And I never know where our discussions are going to go when we start talking about them. But it actually is interesting to see that a lot of these relationships play the same type of role as different things that we have in our lives, right? Like friendships. Like one of the things that you discussed with the teams and keeping those players around was that excitement or whatever, right? And I feel like more than excitement, what I would try to encompass it as is there's some type of meaning associated with my time and my value. If I watch your game and I feel no meaning from it, then I'm not going to reinvest in it. I have to make sure that there's some type of meaning that I feel in that, right? And when we talked about fandom initially, we just thought about it as a simple thing of who do I cheer for, right? But as we go more and more and we delve deeper into the conversation, we start to realize that fandom seems like it's a part of us, a part of who we are, a part of how we deal with situations, a part of what we give value to. And I feel like that's a beautiful thing, is that knowing our fandom doesn't necessarily resonate with nothing. It's actually a huge part of who we are and what we represent. So no matter how you're a fan, if you're a bandwagon fan, if you're a subtle fan, if you're a longtime fan, whatever it is, right, it should be something that's cherished and it should be something that's valued by you. And as long as it's valued by you, then I feel like that's the biggest thing to take away from that. So
I think that was well said, and I think that's about as good as we can summarize it. So I think that's it. Real quick, how did you become a Pirates fan? Pittsburgh Pirates.
So Pirates fans, the farm team from Indianapolis is the Indianapolis Indians. I was initially a Cleveland Indians fan, and crazy thing with baseball, farm teams can be so they ended up becoming a part of the Pirates. And just because of that local aspect of them, and a lot of the guys playing for the Pirates, even some of the ones that didn't end up going on to the Pirates, you got to see them. McCutchen, Polanco, Barry Bonds before I actually went and watched some of the games and stuff. But Jamison Tyon, you got to see all these guys as they developed. And again, it was that storyline. We get to see somebody before they're going to get to the league. And with baseball, it's very interesting because you don't even know if someone's going to make it to the major league. So for me, again, it was that local association, and I developed that storyline. I invested in the players, the farm system. I understood the coaches and what we were doing. And for me, it provided some type of meaning. So I think that I continue with that investment because the meaning seemed valuable in the long term. So,
all right.
Yeah, for sure.
And we also, just really quick about the podcast itself, we just got a notification that we're on Amazon Music now. So I don't know if anybody uses Amazon Music. Check us out there. Check us out on, of course, Podbean, Spotify, and iTunes. Also, check us out on Twitter, Beyond Sports PJ on Twitter.
Yeah.
And give us your fandom. Who are you a fan of? What type of fan are you? Tweet at us. Let us know. We'll get back to you. That would be fun just to see what type of fan you guys are. So yeah, keep the conversation going. This has been a fun conversation, and
yeah, for sure.
It'd be a shame for it to end. So let's keep it going.
Let's keep it going. With that said, anything else, Jeremy, before we get out of here?
No, that's it. It's a good conversation.
Right. Well, this is Beyond Sports with Paul and Jeremy. I'm Paul.
I'm Jeremy.
All right, and thank you guys for listening one more time. Appreciate you, and make sure that you come and check in with us next week.
All right, see you.
All right, peace.